Hey everybody. Today I'd like to talk to you about an incident that happened last month, the end of February, out in Vermont, where a VFR pilot was on a morning flight with his family in a Cherokee, and he encountered clouds, icing conditions, and an inadvertent IMC situation. And what's unique about this situation is they live to tell about it. Most of the time, somebody in a small plane like this goes into icing, gets iced up, gets into the clouds, and he's strictly a VFR pilot. Most of the time, they're not around to tell us exactly what happened. But in this case, the whole family survived. He's able to get it on the ground, not in one piece, but didn't get killed, which is good. But I think there's a few valuable lessons that we can learn from this. So he's got a good interview that he gave to this local TV station. Let's take a listen to this, and I'll give you my thoughts on it and see if we can all learn something from it.
We started approaching, and we were seeing clouds. We went over some clouds and around some clouds, and as we were getting closer to Rutland, there was like a big open hole, so we thought, well, maybe now's the time to go down under to get, to the airport. Because it was reported at moderate VFR, like maybe 10 minutes sooner, because I have all the equipment in the plane to check real-time weather, and METARS is a instantaneous weather report from the airport. And
now, there's a lot of mistakes in this flight. Going in the first place was probably a bad idea. VFR pilot, he's dodging a lot of clouds, going up and over them, underneath some clouds, doing some scud running. When there's icing forecast, and the terminal forecast had to have been bad because a system was moving in. So probably shouldn't have taken this flight in the first place. But the second mistake that he made, besides continuing on when things got bad, was thinking that whatever he's using to get his weather data was instantaneous. It's not instantaneous. I personally use ForeFlight, and I've got an ADS-B in. I've got a Sentry device that works fantastic. But when you pull up the weather for a particular airport, there's a spot in there that tells you how old that report is. And often, it's up to a half an hour old, sometimes even longer. They don't necessarily update that instantaneously, like he said. So when he's getting into this area, getting close to whatever airport he was going for in Vermont, if he sees that it's VFR, 1,700 feet, which is marginal VFR, but doable, that doesn't necessarily mean that's what it is. And as he's going along, what he should have been doing is watching the trend. If it started off at 3,000 feet and in a half an hour it's down to 1,700 feet, I don't know if that's what it was, but probably. That should, be a red flag for you. And the second thing is he gets on top, so he's VFR on top, and he said, I found this one last big hole, and I'm going to descend through that. So that's what we call a sucker hole. And if you're VFR on top and it's broken and you've got holes that you can go through, don't wait for the last hole. I did that once a long time ago in a Cherokee Twin Comanche, and I was on a long cross country, and the clouds, started off 100% VFR and started flying over a layer of clouds, and the holes got smaller and smaller, and I decided to descend it through the last hole that I could see, and I ended up kind of like him, coming through the bottom of the clouds. It was a lot lower than I thought. The visibility was bad. It was raining, and that was a bad call. I wish I'd have made that decision to go get under the clouds 20 or 30 miles sooner. So I learned from that. Boy, that was probably 35, 40 years ago. But do not trust that ADS-B information you're going to get on your ForeFlight or whatever he has in his airplane is current and up to date and instantaneous. Unless it says, 0 minutes or 5 minutes, it could be really old.
I checked 10 minutes prior. It was 1,700 feet MVFR. Once I got down in that hole, and I was like, this, it doesn't look like 1,700 feet. And I checked the METARS, and it said 800 feet. And I was like, this ain't good. So I was like, we got to climb. We got to get can't go through this. So it just seemed to be building so fast. I mean, you know, you're up in the air, things that happen so slowly, it seems, and stuff. But when we got in that position, just seemed to just, this system, this mountain, it just engulfed us. So as we were climbing out, we ended up entering the clouds. And as a VFR pilot, I'm not supposed to be in the clouds at all, and I have no experience in the clouds. And the plane very quickly.
So another thing to consider when you're going to descend through a sucker hole is if it doesn't work out and you need to go back up through that hole, you got to remember, you're not in an F-16. You just can't point straight up. You've got to fly around that hole and get through there. Now, like he said, sometimes those holes can slam shut. I've seen that happen a lot. So you got to be careful about that. But if you're spiraling back up through the hole, you got to stay on the outside edge of the hole and work your way up through that hole. You know, he accidentally flew into the clouds, and as a VFR pilot, that's not good. Plus, there's icing, and so he found himself in a really bad situation.
Gained icing. We've seen it on the windshield. We've seen it on the wings. Josiah was right on the carb heat, my co-pilot, and we knew we had icing, but the carb heat took care of it, and we were climbing. We got to 5,500 feet, and I tried to move more west because I knew it was clearer over there before this all happened, and it was a bad decision because it took me closer to the mountain, even though I knew it was clearer on that side of the mountain. And
yeah, if you're inadvertent IFR, stay away from the mountains. And I think he's wrong. The weather was moving from that direction. Yeah, maybe it was clear 30 or 40 miles that way, but you're IFR and you're in a mountainous area, steer away from the mountains.
But at the 5,500 feet or 5,000 feet, I can't remember, but I was above this mountain, and I started to come, to the west, and the plane just, it wouldn't maintain altitude anymore. It usually should climb at 106 miles an hour, and at 106 miles an hour, it wouldn't even fly. And we stalled. And he yells out, "Dad, we're stalling. So I did a stall recovery, tried to level out at 106, full power, full prop. It just wouldn't maintain altitude. And we started a couple stalls. Now, like I said, I'm not an instrument pilot. I'm in the clouds. I can't see nothing. We're really scared. And then we get in a fully developed stall spin. For people that don't know what that is, the plane stalls, the wing drops, and you start they call it the death spiral. We were losing full deflection on the artificial horizon.
And that brings up another point. If you get ice on your wings, your plane's performance is going to suffer dramatically. You heard him say, plane usually climbs really good at 106 miles an hour, but at 106, it's stalled. Yeah, it's gonna. If you get ice on the wings and ice on your plane, you're going to have to fly at a faster airspeed. You might not be able to hold altitude. And definitely in a Cherokee, which is a pretty small airplane with 3 people in it, you don't have a lot of extra power to begin with. You put a load of ice on there and you get a bunch on the wings, you're going to have to increase your airspeed a lot. And if that means you got to descend and at a higher airspeed to keep it from stalling, then that's what you have to do. He just continued to try, and it always flies at 106. It's not going to work, obviously. And stall spin. Kind of sounds like it was actually a spiral, but either way, he came out of it.
2,000 feet pegged on the vertical speed, 160 mile an hour, straight to the ground, spinning. And Garmin G5, I had my eyes on that thing. I had just seen, and I just did a spin recovery and pulled out. And when we pulled out, we came out of the clouds and we seen the mountain. I turned away from it, tried to level out. It stalled again. We seen the mountain again, the cliff, It turned away again. We stalled the last time, I believe. And we came out of the mountains. I seen this wall of rocks, the trees over there, and I knew at that point, this plane's crashing. I'm not flying out of this. So I picked my spot, and I just tried to match the grade of the mountain as we climbed, and I just pulled back, and I just followed the grade of those trees until I stalled at 56 mile an hour. I stalled into the trees. Luckily, we went right between two trees. It ripped the wings off. We pitched down a little bit, kind of heading into the mountain, but we hit some smaller trees that kind of acted like a ramp, and we had at least 4 or 5 feet of snow up there that kind of made like a little kind of a swoosh. We came to rest with a tree into the dashboard, but all we got is he's got some stitches. I got some stitches. I got this little broken bone. My daughter, not a scratch. My precious little girl, just not a tiny little scratch and a little whiplash. We all got some whiplash.
Wow, that had to be terrifying. So let's just quickly recap a couple of the lessons that we can learn from this, right? So number one, if you're a VFR pilot in a small plane like a Cherokee 140, be a little more cautious if you're dealing with mountainous terrain, multiple cloud layers, icing forecast. You don't have to push it quite so far. If you are going to continue on with a flight like this, keep up-to-date weather information. Keep track of the trends. Don't just wait until you're right at your destination to see what the weather's going to be like. Because as we've seen, some of these METARs can be kind of old. Like look here on the ForeFlight that I got pulled up. This one's, I think, 23 minutes old. This is the first one I pulled up. They are often way out of date. Sometimes it'll say 5 minutes, 23 minutes. I've seen them almost an hour old. So make sure the weather you're looking at is current. Also, if you're going to be going down through a sucker hole, don't wait till the last one. Descend while the clouds are still widely broken. You've got big holes to go through. And if you do go through a sucker hole, which I do not recommend, make sure it's big enough to climb back up through if you don't like what you see when you get to the bottom of it. And when you're climbing back up through holes, you got to stay on the outside or inside edge, or on the edge of the hole essentially, and fly around the outside. Keep it at best rate. Keep it at VY. Just take your time. Slowly make your way up through that hole. And especially as a VFR pilot, stay out of the clouds. Do whatever you have to do to stay out of the clouds. And as we saw, once you got iced up, you got in the clouds, you got iced up, the plane's not going to perform like it normally does. You're going to have to fly at a higher airspeed to keep it from stalling. And yeah, you might not be able to maintain altitude. Doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter what you want it to do. It's only what it can do. So if you got to fly at a faster than normal airspeed to keep from stalling, well, do that. Stalling is just going to make the problem 10 times worse. One thing that really saved this guy was once he realized that he was going to crash, he accepted that fact. That's what kills most pilots, or a lot of pilots in this situation, is pilots have a hard time accepting the fact that they're not going to make it. They're going to crash. And what they end up doing is they end up pulling back and pulling back and pulling back, not accepting the fact that they're going into the trees, and then they end up stalling and going straight in, instead of like this guy who accepted the fact that he wasn't going to make it, was going to crash, and kept the plane from stalling, hit it in a level attitude, slow as he could. I don't know if he put the flaps down or not, but I think right before he hit the trees, you might want to put the flaps down, although that might make things worse in an icing situation. So take that for what it's worth. But he did what, like Bob Hoover's always said, in the event of a forced landing, fly the thing as far into the crash as possible. Maintain control. It sounds like he was just lucky that he got in between two trees and ripped the wings off, but if you can, that's a good way to dissipate a lot of energy. All right? So I think we can all learn something from this incident, and try not to do it yourselves. I'm sure I'm really going to try not to do that. Anyway, that's all I've got for now. And as always, don't forget to keep your speed up, especially if you get ice on your wings.